everyone for tuning in to yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transport. Now, at this point, we're in the finish line for the Transit Coast project, by which I mean um, this. So we have five big cases, right? Boston, which has been out for long, Istanbul and Italy, which are out. The Swedish case is done, it's just formatting. The New York case is all but done, and the synthesis, taking everything together and also adding a lot of other information that we got from a lot of work, again, reading sources, interviewing people, but in places that are not those five places. So for example, we did a bunch of interviews in Paris. I did a couple in Germany, some in Britain, maybe some other American cities in New York and Boston, some in Korea, one in Manila. So kind of splicing everything together, and again adding things from other places. So because that part is effectively done, at this point it means that the hard work is elsewhere. And so I'm going to uh, kind of turn this into a crayon session. And so, what is the crayon session? The crayon session is that uh, I'm going to preview something that we're going to say in the synthesis. And that thing is that it is absolutely possible for pretty much anywhere to reduce their construction costs to not the lowest in the world, so not the cheapest Turkish or Spanish projects, but things that are not much more expensive than those. So things things along the lines of 150 to 200 million dollars a kilometer. Um, I believe that that is achievable in every developed country. Uh, it's also achievable in every developing country, but I think the recipe for that's going to be a little bit different. Um, so I have some opinions about what India should be doing to reduce its costs, but they're less solid than what the United States needs to do, or the United Kingdom, or Germany. And the only exceptions are places with unusually bad geology, by which I do not mean New York. I mean things like Amsterdam, and even Amsterdam is expensive not just because of its alluvial soil, but also it has essentially British institutions at this point about privatization of the state, uh, the deprofessionalization of the civil service, uh, subordination of engineering expertise to politics, and so the Netherlands too could stand to reduce its building costs. And I'm going to kind of weaponize this and talk about what high and medium high cost places would be able to do were their costs low, which again is something that is not that hard. And when I say not that hard, I mean it requires telling people who feel politically important that they're no longer in the loop, but it's not unknown. It's not a black box. The recipe looks there, and in New York, I think we've managed to explain away about a factor of 10, give or take, in the cost difference, sometimes a little bit less. Um, no, at no point I think do we explain less than a factor of 6. And again, in cheaper places, maybe not as bad. Maybe they don't have the excessive soft costs in Germany that they do in the United States or the United Kingdom. The procurement in Germany is not broken. So things like that. And so um, I'm going to just not mention what the cost is because there are. I mean, this is a range, and I said 150 to 200. There are a lot of things that are more than that. The Nordic countries, which are kind of deteriorating, are at this point maybe 250 at some places. Like uh, Länsimetro in Helsinki, the first phase was 100 and a bit per kilometer, but second phase is 240, I think, or 230 per kilometer. $1 million. So it's not euros, dollars, but still. And so um, I'm I'm going to very vaguely assume 200, and kind of expect that it might be a little bit less for really simple things and a little bit more for more complex things, and just talk about what's doable on that. And this is, as I said, it's going to be a Crayon session, but it's not going to be just a Crayon session because a lot of things need to be done that are not Crayon. So when I say Crayon, as a reminder, what I mean is things you can just draw as lines on a map. This is Crayon. This is lines on a map. So this is a kind of pre-prepared map that we're gonna go over, and I hope to go over as much of it as possible today, given time constraints. But some of this may turn out to be crap, and we might need to delete that. Some stuff might be added. I'm not sure. Let's get to it. So anyway, this is Crayon because these are distinct lines on a map. Okay, so the solid lines are lines that exist. So, for example, this line is called the Nostrand Avenue line. It carries the 2 and 5 trains, and I'm currently only coloring it red because separately they should just do things so that they don't have to do this kind of splitting, merges, and recombinations, the reverse branching or interlining that offers a few more transfer free rides, but at the cost of lower frequency and lower reliability, system wide. So anyway, this line, the Northern Avenue line, terminates here at Flatbush Avenue, Brooklyn College. And it was never intended to terminate this. This is actually a pretty weird layout for a terminal. Usually, terminals are usually terminals have island platforms. Now, New York prefers side platforms at most stations, but it's different at a terminal because at a terminal, there are no different directions, right? There's only one direction, which is back in the other direction. And so the norm at a subway terminal in New York is island, but here it's side platforms, and the reason is that these were intended to be continued. And I'm going to see if I can find the track map that I have. It's this one. So the track map is due to the Crayonista Van Schnook, aka Andrew Lynch, who has been doing this for quite a lot of time, and in the last couple years has been really stepping it out and has been saying a lot of very interesting things about, like, not just drawing crayon like this, but also explaining the motivations, explaining the market, explaining who would use it. And so, anyway, so this line, Nostrand, I just bring it up because it is crayon. I mean, it's crayon, but it's crayon that's been planned when the line was first built in the 1920s. So this is a line from the 1920s, and notice two things. The first is that, as I mentioned, this is side platforms with this kind of awkward thing in the back, where normally you would expect an island. The second thing is you might notice that there are, underneath this kind of bridge between the two platforms, there is an overrun track. There are overrun tracks, and now these are not for the benefit of trains that avoid bumper tracks because there are bumper tracks. Again, there's this bridge. No, this is because this line was supposed to be extended. It was built in the 20s with the expectation that it should be extended. Plans in the late 20s and the 30s called for it to be extended. Subsequent plans after World War II assumed that this line, Flatbush, as well as a line under Utica, with, you might notice this Bellmouth, would be built immediately after 2nd Avenue subway. And so this was so these lines, which are Utica and Nostrand, are official crayon. So when I say crayon, I just draw them as dashed lines. I can draw the system as if it included them, with maybe some station locations. So this is maybe a pretty closely spaced station system. This is because of buses. Like, the idea is to hit where the buses go. And likewise, Utica, it's the same thing. And the plan, and you notice I'm drawing it in a different color. So the plans were to extend this, but then later to build underneath and then extend it into a full line. So some of it is old Crayon, some of this is new Crayon. This is an example of new Crayon. The reason this is new Crayon is that this area, Gateway Center, is a very recent development. It only opened in the 2000s as a very suburban style mall right next to the Parkway. Very auto oriented, but it's close enough to the subway that you can make something happen with it if you want to. Um, so um, so as I said, so this is going to include Crayon, but not just Crayon, because it's not just these things that need to happen on the subway in New York. There are other things. Um, so I actually blogged this. I'm going to just mention the blog. Systematic Investments, New York, Pedestrian Observations. This one. So what do you mean by systematic investment? What happened to the... Okay, formatting. Okay, this is better. Um, is So systematic investments are things that are not just a line, but things are system-wide. So an example of something system-wide is accessibility. Uh, so Now this is just two paragraphs about the poor state of accessibility in New York. Uh, and and from what I've heard from insider and outsider sources within the MTA, and again seeing this cost difference crop up, my guess is that New York should be able to do this for about $10 million per station. So this means that for about uh, I'll get to you in a sec. Comment on that. So it's about 10 million. It should be about 10 million per station. But also you need to know how to count stations. So a station is two platforms. And the reason this is two platforms is that you need usually three elevators, one to get from the street to the mezzanine, and then one from the mezzanine to each platform. This is assuming side platforms and fare barriers, but in the comparanda, for example, Madrid, this is how they build the system. Now in Berlin, you only need a single elevator because Berlin has island platforms and not sides. So this is an island, this is sides. New York is almost entirely sides. Here, here. If you see islands, it's often because it's an express station, so it's two platforms anyway. Sides, sides. So Berlin prefers islands, and Berlin also has no fare barriers. And this means that there's no mezzanine, there's no need for any of that. You just have a single elevator at most station from the street level to the platform, and this means that Berlin, which is not normally a low-cost city, builds elevator accessibility at 1/3 the cost of Madrid, which is a very low-cost city. Why? Because Madrid needs 3 elevators and Berlin only needs 1. So Madrid needs to be spending about 5 to 6 million euros at this point per station, and Berlin only about 2 million. And and again, these are very recent costs. It's not costs from 15 years ago. Both cities are currently in the process of becoming 100% accessible. In Berlin, this was supposed to be done this year. It will not be done. I believe they're currently talking about 2024. In Madrid, it's a little bit slower. They're talking, I believe, late 20s. They're going to be 100% accessible. And now Madrid, maybe you don't know how big the Madrid metro is. It is vast. And the reason is that Madrid metro construction costs are so low that they build the metro in very low density geographies. And this way, and so bear in mind that this is, as we're talking about the growth between 1995 and 2007, something like half of the system has been built in the last 25 to 30 years. And if you're wondering whether that makes it easier to do accessibility, sure, but I mean, a lot of the stuff is old as well. And so, so accessibility is really important. not just for people with disabilities. It's also, I mean, I use the elevators whenever I have heavy luggage, for example. Uh, Paris deserves a special demerits for its uniquely poor accessibility. So New York is among the worst in the world, among the largest systems, alongside London. But the absolute worst is not New York or London. I believe these are second and third worst. The worst is Paris. In Paris, nothing is accessible on the metro except line 14. And this means that whenever I needed to get to the airport, I had luggage. Now, I lived at Nation. Nation is an important metro and RER transfer point in the east of the city. You can even think of it as the eastern Paris equivalent of Étoile, where Arc de Triomphe is, except the central business district of Paris is shifting west, so Étoile is kind of in the CBD and is full of tourists, and Nation is a residential. It is a mix, but more residential than commercial area, and doesn't have a lot of tourists. So it's this area. Nation. I lived here, and so very close to the station, but I would never use any of the metro outlets. I would use the RER because the RER, unlike the metro, is accessible. It was an elevator almost direct with the platform. The metro required many flights of stairs. When the elevator was out, which it sometimes was, it would lengthen my trip by, 5 minutes or 7 minutes just through the labyrinth of all these staircases. I missed a flight because of that once. So the situation in Paris is unacceptable. They claim that the 300 or so metro stations would cost 5 billion euros to make accessible, which first of all is a much higher cost than elsewhere in Europe, except maybe London. But second, if it's 5 billion, you should probably still do it. No, in New York, they don't mean 5 billion, even if it's euros and not dollars per 300 stations. It's much more. They think in New York it's about 50, even 70 million per station. They've seen 3-figure million per station. And again, it should be about 10 million. The one caveat is that it's 10 million at a station that is not a transfer. If it's a transfer, then remember you need 3. This is for 3 elevators. If it's a transfer, then it's doubled because it's extra stops. So, for example, at this station, the cost should double. I don't know if this is accessible. It's not depicted on Andrew's map, unfortunately. But we can let's actually check right now. New York City subway map, and the official one should label the accessibility. So we will be able to check how many stops there are that are inaccessible, which again, it's most of them, but how many of them are transfers, because these are more complex. And again, this is doable for 10 million a station, give or take. Now, while this is loading, comment on that. EMB Princeton, for people who don't know, is someone who keeps challenging me a lot on Twitter. He is a biologist at Rutgers and a EMB activist, as his name might suggest. By the way, if you're wondering why Princeton as opposed to Rutgers, he lives in Princeton because of a two-body problem. But he is a professor at Rutgers. And he keeps saying that the construction cost issue is just experience. So if you build more, your cost will fall. This is incorrect. Low-cost countries can sometimes get a little lower cost if they repeat the same things over and over. This happened in Turkey with little refinements, or in Korea to some extent. But usually the first line is cheap, and then costs rise as all the surplus extracting actors come out of the woodwork and insist that the stations must have extensive space for back office space, or as they insist that that you should not stage stations in a park, because what about the neighborhood residents and the 2 years in which the park is going to be out? Okay, so this is the official map. Let's move my head in this direction for a sec. So, you can see which stations are accessible with the little wheelchair icon. And let's just see which transfers are inaccessible. So, note that most stations are inaccessible. But for example, in the Bronx, the most important station is Yankee Stadium. No, Not it's the basis, not just the transfer. And note that this is accessible. This is a transfer that is inaccessible. Here, basically nothing is accessible, and this is quite honestly a travesty. A lot of the accessibility investments are overbuilt, and by overbuilt I mean they're just bundling them with things like station repairs, funded out of and then they claim that this is an accessibility cost in order to say that they can't afford to do it more. So here we have just one inaccessible transfer. In Manhattan, this is partly accessible, so see, the A and C are accessible, the one is not. So it's not so this is inaccessible, but not as a transfer. Usually the Midtown Manhattan stations are accessible. So for example, Columbus Circle, wheelchair. This is partly accessible. Times Square. The shuttle is not accessible, but the 7 is there. Grand Central. 51st Lex. Oh, 59th Lex is not accessible. Interesting. This is probably going to be a difficult one. 68th Hunter is being made accessible at a very high cost. They are bundling it with adding more exits. This is new, so accessible. Herald Square is accessible. Oh, the L stops. These ones are not accessible. The example I started with on Andrew Lynch's map, Metropolitan Lorimer, that is inaccessible. So again, lots and lots of work need to be done. Oh, this is only the 6 is accessible. So in New York overall, they've made 100 key stations accessible. If they just added elevators, no, not ramps. Ramps are cheaper, but they're very rarely viable on an urban subway. Yeah, Times Square is not accessible because the ramp because the Times Square shuttle is it's not inaccessible in the sense of you need steps. There are no steps. It's just that American standards have certain standards for what counts as an accessible slope, and the standard is 1 in 13. This is not an especially unusual number. For example, in Spain, I think it's 7%. So it's basically the same up to rounding. And the slope here is a little bit too steep. And for example, in Norway, I know that the standards keep getting tighter. So older parts of the system are accessible, but they're 1 in 10, and they're trying to redo things at not 1 in 10, but 1 in 20, so 5%. But again, the 7 is accessible. So, again, 100 stations are accessible out of... It's kind of hard to count because do you double count Times Square and Port Authority? I mean, you should. I mean, they're accessible, but they're two different complexes to make accessible. Or 14th Street and 6th Avenue, 14th Street and 7th Avenue, they're connected. So there are 468 stations, I believe, minus 100, but plus all these transfers. We're talking about 400 something station complexes, and again, a station to me is one line, possibly express. So 10 million times 400 and a bit, we're talking maybe $4.5 billion or $5 billion. And this is, again, an investment that New York City needs to take. It's an investment that London, which is also only about a quarter accessible, and has excessive accessibility costs. I do not know why. I can guess based on other cost accesses in London that they're having really bad procurement. So the cost in London, I think, maybe are $20 million a station. 2x procurement is actually reasonable in context. So this is something that London absolutely should be spending a couple billion on making the entire system accessible. Paris, same thing. They think it's 5 billion. It should not be 5 billion euros. It should be 2.5 billion euros probably. At Madrid, closer would be 2 billion euros. So again, this is really important. And again, it's not just for people in wheelchairs. It's for people, first of all, walkers. Second, heavy luggage. Third, sometimes people are in chronic pain and can't climb steps. Then there's just lifting heavy things. I don't even mean luggage. I mean if I just bought something heavy. Okay, I mean so you see the chair that I'm in, uh, that I think I mentioned last week or 2 weeks ago. So that chair, I didn't mention it 2 weeks ago. I mentioned it last week. So this chair I got at IKEA, and I gotta tell you guys something. Dragging a chair from IKEA home on public transit, it's very nice that there were elevators. Um, so, uh, so again, this is what it's called. It's called universal design in accessibility, because the idea is that it's not getting something that's just for people with certain disabilities. For example, paratransit in the United States is mandated. So it's in the United. So one of the, I think, bad parts of American disability legislation, and this might even predate the ADA. Berlin IKEA is there are two IKEAs in Berlin. Both are on transit. Maybe there's some suburban ones. The ones so there's one in Spandau and there's one in Südkreuz. So we went to Südkreuz, and then we dragged this giant cardboard box that had no handle and weighed 20 something kilograms from the IKEA parking lot to the S-Bahn station, which was incredibly stressful. And then getting it onto the train, that was not even that hard once we were at the station. Changing trains, because I don't live on the north-south tunnel or on the ring. And then at Ostbahnhof, the elevator didn't. There's an elevator, but it points in the wrong direction, so it's not the easiest access to get home. So we broke and tried to just assemble the chair on site. I did assemble an IKEA chair on the corridor of a train station, and then once it was done, we realized we should have done this all along at the IKEA parking lot, because the chair has wheels, so it's kind of cumbersome to push, but it's not like literally lifting 20 something kilograms without handles. I'm glad that Prague is this. Do you know how much it's supposed to cost, Pony? I'm just curious. But anyway, so universal design means you do the same thing that works for everyone. So this is an example with with good ramps and escalators and elevators, and you don't try to segregate it away with paratransit. The United States mandates paratransit, so even if the system is fully accessible, you are still required to offer paratransit on demand, except that the rules for what on demand means, and those rules are humiliating. So yeah, in theory, there's something that's for the use of people with mobility difficulties, except that, for example, you need to book it in advance, and so it's not quite on demand. It's on demand, except you get it you get it by tomorrow, and you're given a half-hour window in which you need to be ready, and it's incredibly slow, and and so uptake is very low, to the point that when they figured, oh, this is really expensive to provide, let's just give everyone Uber rides. So even though the Uber rides cost less than paratransit, the subsidy skyrocketed because paratransit is so humiliating that Uber is a step up. So it tends to float around 10 million CZR per station. Wait, 4 million euros, that's without the PPP adjustment, right? So with PPP adjustment, it's going to be higher. Ugh. And I mean, I've been to the stations. It's the stations are islands, right? I mean, they're very deep, but they're islands, right? So Czechia is 13 to the dollar. So, oh, that's not so bad. That's like $7-8 million per station. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So what? Two elevators per station? One to the platform, one to the mess. Um, at any rate, so this is really important, and this is something New York could absolutely do on a reasonable cost. I mean, New York is spending something like $50 billion on a 5-year capital plan. Like making all of this accessible? This should be at most a $5 billion project. Something can be done. It can be. Maybe you can't do it in a 5 years because there's design latency. Okay, design everything. Build the stuff that's already designed. Design everything else now. Uh, Make sure that you deal with the utilities better and have good procurement that doesn't take a million years to set up. And then by 2030, maybe very early 30s, all of this has a little wheelchair icon without humiliating paratransit. And it actually gives, and this, remember, saves you money because paratransit is humiliating. So even if you do need to, run it, people will just not take it up because it's terrible. And yeah, there are people who are used to this, but at the end of the day, the subway is faster. And if you maintain the elevators properly, which is not that hard, you need to pay Otis, Kona, these kinds of uh, agencies, elevator builders, sure, but would you rather pay them for elevator maintenance or would you rather be paying $500 million a year in demand response? This is paratransit. This is how much of this is recovered by fares. This is how incredibly expensive this is. It's $100 per rider because it's incredibly inefficient to do this, even with all the humiliations. Um, So, yeah, $5 billion on this, and you probably don't need to spend the 500 mil or very little of it in the future. Congratulations. What else? Going on this post, platform screen doors. Did they talk about automation? Probably. But it's in that. So platform screen doors are really important because when you have platform screen doors, passengers aren't going to fall on the train. Or jump or be pushed. This is a platform screen door. This is on Crossrail. This is in Singapore. So usually there's an expression screen doors when it's full height like this, or edge door when it's not up to the ceiling. So this might lead to problems with the air conditioning, but the issue is not save money on air conditioning. It's helpful, but it's not the main use case. The main use case is safety. And once you do that, for example, trains can enter the station faster. Again, much more safe. It's going to be much safer. And so this is an example of an edge door. It's not full height. This is in Hong Kong. And as you may be able to tell, this is for This is for Hong Kong Disneyland. And so this is also really useful to do. And how much does it cost? Well, I haven't seen the cost of the retrofits in Singapore. The example that I showed you in Singapore was not retrofit, it was original. But they have retrofitted all the elevated station with half heights. And I do not know the cost, but I know in Paris what the cost is. And it's about 4 million euros. But so make it $5 or $6. Parisian stations are not long. In New York, it would be about 10 to 12 per platform face. Sorry, per double platform face. So express stations count double, transfers count double. So it's not going to be 468 stops, but only going to be the equivalent of like 600. So this is maybe $6 billion, if that. 7 would be very high. So they're talking. So what they're saying is 55 million per station. That's bullshit. This should be about 10, maybe a bit more. So again, we're talking maybe 6 billion. So we said 5 billion for accessibility, if that's 6 for platform edge doors, platform stick doors. And again, all this can be done this decade if they want. Signaling improvement is stuff like moving block signaling or even full automation. Full automation is very rare. How do I deal with different door placements in New York? In the long run, just get consistent rolling stock. So you de-interline. This is really important. So when I talk about de-interlining, what I mean is, remember how I mentioned that I'm moving around colors a little bit. So here is the current map. So you might notice that you have on the west side the 1, 2, 3. The 1 runs local, the 2 and 3 run express on this trunk line. The 1 diverts to Lower Manhattan to South Ferry. The 2 and 3 go to Brooklyn. On the east side, 4, 5, 6. So the 6 has this kind of express section, but then in Manhattan it's local. 5 and 4 become the Manhattan Express. 6 only runs as far south as City Hall and goes back north. 4 and 5, like the 2, 3, go into Brooklyn. Then they recombine, and the 2, 3 still run together and are the local line up to Franklin. The 4 and 5 are the express line. And then they split and recombine. So the 2 and 5 share tracks here on not on Flatbush, on Nostrand. 4 stays express to Crown Heights. The 3 stays local. Usually the express goes longer than the local. This is a rare exception. The 3 goes to new lots, and then overnight when the 3 does not run, the 4 becomes local and just runs to new lots. Correct way to do it is either local express or local express. I drew it as local express. And this way, the problem is that this is a really complex junction. For a brief moment, the 2, 3, and 5 all share tracks. The problem is that the 2, 3 coming from the north side, so coming from the upper west side, was, even before 2nd Avenue subway opened, this was the busiest, the most crowded trunk line entering Midtown Manhattan. Number 2 was the L, which has problems I'm going to get into in a little bit. It's partly signaling, partly electrical capacity, and partly these are bumper tracks. And then the 4 and 5. And so these are some of the busiest and most crowded lines coming from the other side. And here, it's really important to make sure that this does not mess them up. And unfortunately, it currently does mess them up. So you need to change the coloring from this to this. This is really important. Likewise, the coloring here, you see yellow and orange. So yellow means it's Broadway Express because the local runs by the tunnel. Orange means it's the 6th Avenue Express. The local goes on different lines. And here on the bridge, they're run by color, and then around here they split and recombine. This by itself just is a 2-minute delay. They need to have a camera pointed at the train for control center to look, just because of how complex this is and how much the trains delay each other. So this is why this is single color. You can flip the colors if you'd like. So you can make this yellow and then this bit orange, but the colors need to be consistent. You should not have cross-color track sharing. PSDs have to be a long-term project. No, they're not dependent on a new rolling stock, because you just need to be consistent within each line. And even then there are, you can do weird hacks like have doors with multiple locations, or doors that open up and down, not sideways. So there are tricks to get around that. It's just, you don't really need that if you don't try to make sure every train can go on every track. This is not how most systems work. Most systems have captive rolling stock per line. Yeah, they cascade between lines sometimes, but while the line is in operation, there's only one set of rolling stock that gets to use it. So for example, in Paris, each metro line has its own pool of rolling stock. And this also is needed, and this requires a little bit of investment, like to rebuild this junction, to make this a little smoother, to rebuild this junction. And again, so this is so I'm drawing it as express blue, local orange. It can be the other way around. Right now it's split. And all these junctions, again, just make delays cascade. They make So they make delays. They make the system very fragile, lower capacity. This is how it works now. So express local, and so they need to do things like maybe make this express or turn these two stations, Queensborough Plaza and Queens Plaza, into one. This is also investment. Uh, but again, but it's so maybe it's not systematic. That's like specific junctions, but it's specifically about making sure that the uh, lines can be kind of separated by color to make the system more resilient. And again, that also helps with the uh, with platform edge doors. No, this is something that's very New York special. The only other city in the world that has this extent of interlining is maybe London, and even London only has it on some lines, and people in London recognize that they have this problem. So, for example, they're trying to de-interline the two branches of the Northern Line just for capacity, which requires upgrading the transfer point for more passenger uh, for more passenger circulation capacity, more pedestrian circulation capacity, and so and then to some extent Tokyo, but in Tokyo it's mostly the suburban trains that have this problem. And yeah, the ones that interline a lot, like the JR East network with Shonan and Shinjuku, these are less reliable than the private railroads that are mostly captive in the sense that they interline to specific metro lines or toy lines. And so this is a New York special, the extent of interlining, but this can be de-interlined and it's not very expensive. It's rebuilding a handful of junctions that even at today's cost I think might be a billion all combined, and they should not be a billion, it should be a lot less. Maybe not 10x less, but 2x less very easy. Um, so so we're talking 5 plus 6, and there's resignaling. And again, automation is very rare. It is very rare that a system that is not automated becomes automated. I only know of 3 such examples. The most recent and the most extensive is Singapore, where I do not know the cost. I did look. So Singapore built the lines. So in Singapore, all of the lines in the last 20 years have been built driverless from the start, but the 2 older ones, east-west and north-south, were not built driverless. They made them driverless a few years ago. I do not know at what cost. Um, but I do know the costs in Paris. And the cost in Paris were about on M4, I believe it's about 12 million euros per kilometer. Let's say $16 million. Maybe a little more because of some overruns that they've had recently. But uh so so in Nuremberg, this is how much it cost. That's the first system that this is the first city that made a manual line driverless, and the and again, so maybe with cost overruns in Paris, it might even be 20, but that's Paris not being great. This should be not much more than 10. Now, what is the length of the metro? What is the length of the system in New York? It's hard to say because, I mean, you can just count, and then it's going to be about 300. I want to say 370 something kilometers. So system length, route length is 399. Is 399? They say. Um, but but first of all, I think they duplicate a little bit. But it's not gonna, more importantly, um, it is more difficult based on triple track and quad track. So maybe revenue track length is what matters. So 1070. So that's like 535 if it's a normal system. So 535 times 10 to 15. I mean, 10 billion would be high for this. Why am I being messaged? So the point is that this is a so automation, and you don't even need to automate. I mean, you probably should because quite a lot of spending in New York on the subway is crew. The crew efficiency is not very good. This is because the timetables are very peaky. Uh, I mean, they're not commuter rail peaky, but they're still pretty peaky. Uh, and they have two crew per train and not one crew per train, as they should. But even at one crew per train, I mean, you can still save that money. I mean, the 10 billion does not have an amazing ROI, but it's an ROI. And and that's on top of things like more reliability out of moving block signaling, more capacity. The trains can run faster. In Paris, the trains on Metro 1 sped by 15 or 20% after they automated. This is pretty useful. Um, so you can even think of it as something like an increase in capacity that you just don't need more trains for because the trains are just going to go. The trains are just going to go faster. They're probably going to turn faster because nobody needs to. Because when the train hits the terminal, um, you probably need a few minutes for timetable buffer, but you don't need for the driver to go to the bathroom and go back if it's driverless. Although honestly, you could just drop in crew. Um, so that is, I don't know, all of these combined are about 20 billion without the Crayon. Now here's the thing. Um, Sometimes Crayon and not Crayon are portrayed as in opposition. Um, um, so if it's um, so if it's something like making the system faster and more reliable and adding more lines, these are not in opposition to each other. So sometimes two different investment alternatives can be in competition. I mean, they're always in competition for money, but they can be in competition for, I don't know what to call it, space or complements. So here's an example of competition in space. So, and I'm going to get to this later, I hope. So you see this crayon that I'm doing? This is Third Avenue, not Second. This is Second, this is Third. Like I have my reasons why I don't think that they should build Second Avenue subway through Midtown. Essentially, it's first of all, this line is really good for going just Upper East Side to West Side, and reverse branching it on Second Avenue just wastes capacity. The second reason is that Midtown jobs are not on Second Avenue. Second Avenue is pretty residential. Third Avenue is where Midtown starts. And so what you want, if you're debating about second or third, you're probably not going to build both, right? Because they're very close to each other. Likewise, various proposals for how to get the subway to LaGuardia, these are in competition. I should probably redraw this. This is this is over kind of residential street where the corner is going to be difficult, so probably it's better to not go on Detmars but to go three but to go maybe three-ish. Let's move the arrow 3 blocks north maybe, so I should do this is I think what the current plans are, and this is again, these are not bad plans. So like this, like they don't serve the neighborhood as well, but there's stuff here. This can be redeveloped, and then do you go here or do you go through here? And this requires a little bit of a tunnel under the runway. And let's make this a straight line. It's also a World War III issue that I have. That whenever I delete a line, when I draw the borders, it makes it a... I think so. This will probably be here. You definitely want to serve Steinway. You definitely want to serve Hazen. Not sure about serving something in between. Probably can do this or something. I'm not sure. So this is maybe underground. Let's compute the distance for a moment while we're at it. But the point is that the different LaGuardia lines are in competition with each other because they all do the same thing. They serve LaGuardia. But if you do something really stupid and not that the thing is stupid, just the example is kind of stupid when you mention it. The line to LaGuardia, the end train to LaGuardia, is not in competition with, let's say, IBX. So IBX's plan, it only goes as far as here, but older plans go as far as here, and they should be reactivated. So this line and this line are not in competition. Quite to the contrary, they complement each other, because if this line is built, great, people can go to the airport more easily. If this line is built, not just IBX again, which is from Jackson Heights to the south, but if this is built also north into the Bronx, then this connects people from more places to this line to LaGuardia, and from the Bronx to this line to LaGuardia, so they synergize. This is going to be maybe less useful for LaGuardia passengers, because LaGuardia passengers pretty much all head to Midtown or maybe the Upper East Side, which is why this extension is so useful. It gets right between the Upper East Side and Midtown, and yep, exactly where people are going to go. And for people who live on the Upper East Side and are not right next to this line, this is a pretty easy transfer. But the employees at the airport are mostly retail workers or baggage handlers or other very low pay working class jobs. They're not on the they don't live on the Upper East Side. They live all over. And so this is going to be better for connecting them to their jobs. This kind of combination. What did they just do? Okay. Sure. I mean, sure, that's useful. Like using, so the issue with the R, for people who don't know, that is that this is the R train. It's this yellow. It's the most local everywhere. It's a very slow line. Currently it goes on like this. And the reason they don't serve it here is that otherwise it would not have any yard. As it is, it's the longest all underground line in the system. And it has to piggyback on this yard. So if you de-interline, the R will need a yard, because the other trains that are inherited from the Southern Division have the Coney Island yard. The R does not have that. Now, if we can do this thing with Staten Island, this kind of extension, which is very Crayon-y. But if you build it like this, then maybe this is not the best place for a yard, but you could stable some trains here. Now, you shouldn't let it blow your budget. You should not be building an above ground yard on airport grounds. But if you can build something here, then why not? So this is again something to do. Let me just make sure I'm not lying when I'm saying 4.7 kilometers. I think this is slightly less direct alignment than maybe 5. Let me count that. So yeah. But the point is that Crayon like this and non-Crayon complement. Sorry, let me amend that. There's one situation in which Crayon and not Crayon are in competition. Again, everything is always in competition for money, but so this is the actual land use here. It's this is all very parking lot. This is an industrial zone, but they absolutely can and should redevelop this and this. So the issue where the clash is when there are different strategies for adding capacity. So 2.4. Yes, it's about a kilometer of subway, and then everything, and then it's going to go back above ground for here. It's 4.8 because I'm rounding everything up to a half kilometer anyway. And now I need to make sure. Do I even need an arrow? Do I have an arrow for these? Yes, I do. So I do need an arrow. Okay. but it's going to be a very short one. No, I do not want to. Okay. So the issue is that if you're using Crayon to add capacity, kind of like Second Avenue Subway, then it's in competition with adding capacity through better signaling. But Second Avenue Subway is not just about adding capacity; it's also about providing a much more convenient Upper East Side to West Side connection, and then Upper East Side to Upper West Side without a bus. I used to live at 72nd in York, so this means, yeah, exactly. You can just turn Con Ed into like from like a gas plant into. So I lived here, so 72nd in York, and I went to Columbia, which was here. So my commute was walk here, take the 72nd Street bus. You might notice that there's no 72nd through the park, so it went like this, change to the subway. It was 50 minutes each way for that year. After the service cuts in June 2010, it was so that if I missed the bus, which came before the cuts every 10 minutes, after every 12, it was faster for me not to wait for the next one, but to walk across the park. If it's a pedestrian path, there is one on 72nd, is a trick, and then take the subway. 50 minutes each way. If this had existed then, it would have been longer by distance because it would be through Times Square. But I computed it would have been 37 minutes and not 50. So this is why Second Avenue Subway Phase 1 is so powerful. So it's not, so other than things like capacity, which are not the main concern for subway expansion in New York, these are not in competition. They reinforce each other because if the trains are faster and more reliable, more people are going to want to ride them, right? So that's going to make future expansions. This is going to make future extensions stronger because more people are going to ride them. And the more lines you build, the more the newer lines can connect to more places. So these are not things that are in competition. Again, money is always finite, but remember, $50 billion per 5-year capital plan. They're planning to have spent around $100 billion in 10 years. And remember that the system-wide things probably should be 20. And that includes things that are like currently planned to be done over a generation or more. And this is something that's doable with a lot of money to spare in 10 years. So this is the situation in New York. And again, Paris needs to do these things. Paris needs to probably also fully automate. In general, more very rich cities should be right now automating their trains just because operator wages are not going down. Paris also has this strike problem where it actually would be more efficient for it to just automate everything at once, and then it would not be vulnerable to strikes whenever the train drivers are pissed at vaccination mandates. And yes, people in France do strike in opposition to vaccination mandates. I mean, not quite on this day. I think it was yesterday. I'm forgetting how many years ago. I think yesterday, 1944. Yeah, in theory, yes. In practice, the specific striking unions in France are drivers, not computer operators of driverless trains. So M14 and M1 operate through strikes. So bear in mind that I think yesterday in 1944, there was a strike by white train drivers in Philadelphia. They were, I believe, I think they were amalgamated, not TWU, who struck in opposition to permitting black people to also drive trains. This was resolved when the federal government said that if they kept striking, they would all be drafted into the army. So unions sometimes strike about things that are not safety, benefits, or wages. and this is how France has so many strikes, and the unions that get the most concessions and strikes somehow are never rich. Um, so the so more places should be automating, and again, automating trains is not expensive nowadays. I mean, maybe it looked weird 10 years ago, but at this point, it's a technically solved problem. And so places like London, Paris, Stockholm, Munich, especially Munich. So I don't know what the Munich U-Bahn labor productivity is on the S-Bahn, which is harder to automate. The productivity is pretty shit, unlike in Berlin. I think they have something like 550 hours a year per driver in Munich. In Berlin, it's 600 something on the S-Bahn. U-Bahn's always better, less peaky. So it's important to start automating things just to reduce future operating costs. And not for nothing, by the way, Nuremberg is a very wealthy city. It's not Munich wealthy, but it's one of the wealthiest cities in Germany. And so certainly the wealthiest other than Munich that has. I want to say the wealthiest other than Munich has a full U-Bahn, but maybe Hamburg is about comparable. But Hamburg is also incredibly wealthy. And of course accessibility. CBTC is more a thing for the busiest systems, so maybe it's less important in a place like Nuremberg. But it's very important if you're using that to shrink station footprint. So the Italian method for controlling construction costs is if you're building a new line, you're going to build it small. Like we're talking 50-meter trains that are going to be run driverless every minute and a half, maybe 3 minutes off peak. So it's very so it's a way of using frequency to substitute for train size to reduce station construction costs, because the platforms cost a lot to build. If you need to mine, honestly, even if you need to cut and cover them, it can be expensive. If it's not very shallow cut and cover, so very so again, very important, not just in New York. Just in New York, they need to do all of these things at once, and they already have the money because they found the money assuming much higher construction costs. So in New York, again, the systematic stuff is 20 million. Then the Crayon. So let's see. I motivated in a video a couple of weeks ago why they should be building the 7. They should be extending the 7 to College Point, which is here. And I think there's a decent case. It's less clear, but there's a decent case to extend all the way to Whitestone. The one trench is at here. This is a disused airport. You don't need to be underground. You can be open cut, slightly cheaper. I think that post also motivated Nostrand and Utica. I mean, at least this part of Utica. But again, these have been important priorities for generations. There was just no money because construction costs. Canarsie and Gateway Center are maybe a little weirder. Canarsie, I think, used to exist, but as but not as a subway, but it was at grade, and this was actually cut when they were grade separating, like in the 1910s. So they should just do this. This is also really useful for the buses, because right now the buses loop around here, whereas here you could move the stop to where the bus connections are. It makes the buses on flatlands much more efficient. And you can also extend them here. There's actually a lot of ridership here. It's usually bus to subway, but you can just make it all subway. Let me see if not if I know that I blocked it. I just don't remember the. So I call it public transportation in the southeastern margin of Brooklyn, where this is the study area. So this and this basically. And I explain and I motivated why. So this is without the Crayon. Why this and this are good. And these are not going to be expensive. To be very clear. So Canarsie, I'm writing it as 2 kilometers here, but it depends on how far you go. So this is slightly shorter, this is slightly longer. If instead of going here, you go to the pier. Is it possible to automate light rail or metros with grade crossings at this point? I don't know. Light rail is not automated anywhere, I know. There are the mainline rail that they're starting to automate. The mainline trains start from things that are highly metro-like the Yamanote line in Tokyo. And anyway, let's maybe do the larger the bigger version of Canarsie. So that would be with one more stop, and this is something like 2.3-ish. This is a little more speculative, the last bit, but the waterfront might be a good recreational anchor. So this so those southeastern things in Brooklyn, so this, and I mean, again, I'm not telling you what the costs are, but I think this is about 400-ish, 500. It's about 250. And this is dashed, but this is because this is a yard. So the yard is right here. So this means building in the yard and then continuing. So it's a little easier. This probably, we're talking, I don't know, $1 billion if that. This bit is about 6, so also about $1 billion. So all of this combined would be 2.5, maybe 3. Yeah, so it's unclear, and the thing is that light rail is not expected to stop. So if it's like a train with grade crossings, or a mainline train with grade crossings, it is not expected to stop for obstacles in the way, which is why there are which is why there are crossing gates. It is not expected that the driver should be able to stop if there is a car stuck on the tracks. On a streetcar, obviously, it's very different. So is it possible to automate metros with grade crossings? Probably. Again, there's no example that I know of, but probably. Light rail in the sense of a streetcar? Probably not. So again, I think these are motivated. What else is there? IBX is this, and this is really useful as a circumferential connection between all of these kind of tertiary places. None of them by itself is very important, but all combined might be. This might be pretty speculative. So this is just as another route into Jamaica, which is, it's a job center, but it's not a huge job center. It might just be an airport, an easier airport connector, because the A can connect with the airport here, but this is not very frequent. And there's no reason for this to ever be frequent, because not a lot of ridership here or here. So if you do this, then it's kind of an airport connector, because you can go from here or here. The airport goes here or here, the airtrain. Again, this is something that is just might as well included. I'm not going to be wedded to it. This is Cambria Heights. It's by New York standards a low density neighborhood, by Berlin standards a medium density neighborhood. That has some people living in it, so we can look. Again, the really crazy stuff is A to Jamaica. This is just for completion, but it's useful. 1 to City Line might be kind of speculative, and this is just a kind of regional rail takeover for a line that should just go like this instead. So again, maybe that needs to get dropped from any kind of Crayon. But the Eastern Queen, but 6 to Co-op City, yeah, that will defend. Co-op City is big. It's currently on a. Okay, here's a question. Why is this not loading? So let's actually do Co-op City before we do Eastern Queen, just because Co-op City is much more easy to define, just because it's a housing project. It's bounded by the highways. And the 6th train, unfortunately, is on the wrong side of the highways. Moreover, the planned commuter rail station here is also on the wrong side of the highways. So a lot of it is just going here and like seeing what you can get done elevated. So selection, draw polygon. So this is going to be both. This is this is Bay Plaza. It's separate from Co-op City. I believe we do not need to count the stuff on the other side, but that is still, I guess, serviceable, so maybe. So if we start from this, and actually, let me edit drawn shape. This is actually not a bad drawing error. Like there's a lot of jank in this particular tool, but the shape editor is surprisingly not bad. So let's confirm selection and see what's going on here. So this is a residential area, but but the plaza might have a lot of jobs. So all jobs. This is all on the eve of Corona. So this is 8,000 jobs. And you might notice residential commercial. Actually, you're not seeing that it's 8,000 jobs because my head is in the way. This is 8,000 jobs. Chicago has a bunch, yeah. New York had some until the 60s. When is it appropriate to build elevated versus open cut? It depends. Usually you want elevator when you are on a very wide street. Like we're talking Queens Boulevard wide. Maybe Broadway on the Upper West Side, but water under the bridge. If you have a subway that's partly underground, when do you, the rest of it, you can build it elevated if there's a big elevation change. For example, Broadway, North 25th Street in New York. You can do it as an open cut if it's like through a park or something, where the grade doesn't change, but the circumstances do, if that makes sense. Also bear in mind that the cost of an elevated line is not actually that much less than the cost of, I mean, if you're not doing a steel L that's very noisy, but if you're doing a modern concrete L, the cost might not actually be lower than that of just doing full cut and cover. So this is going to be how many people live here. It's going to be a lot because Co-op City is huge. 11,000. And this is 11,000 employed residents, and Co-op City used to be middle class, but it's kind of American middle class, so people who identify as not poor. Like it's not a poor project in any way, but it is. As a European, I would not call Co-op City middle class. Again, the residents call themselves middle class, but I would not call them middle class. So I think there are a bunch of maybe who have age in place or something. But even then, 11,000 employed residents, that's a lot. And now let's see where they work. So we need to add advanced selection. In the advanced selection, let's do we want to do all of New York City or just the Bronx and Manhattan? Let's do just the Bronx and Manhattan for now. So paired means first selection, so people from the first selection to the advanced. It should be a lot less than 11,000 because some people work in the suburbs or maybe Queens or Brooklyn or something. So 6,000, which is still not low. Um, and let's see where they work is the important bit. Like, is it actually serviceable by the subway? So over here, that's not. That's a bus. Um, but this is on commuter rail. Quite a lot of density around Midtown. These are the hospitals. So you can kind of see all the hospitals on this map. Um, so Mount Sinai, Weill Cornell, Einstein. Um, so yeah, this is most of this is perfectly serviceable by the subway if the six were extended. Now, it doesn't pass through the best place because it's around here and it's kind of job poor. But then, first of all, they can change trains, and second, so 125th is viable. Remember, they're already talking about extending Second Avenue subway under 125th, and remember, these are not in competition. Um, these are extensions in different directions. Each extension it makes the others a little bit easier. Um, so this or this. Um, and from here you can even take Second Avenue subway to get a little. Actually, maybe it's not as close to the hospitals because it curves. But the six is pretty good for the hospitals. So for Weill Cornell. So if you're actually getting a large fraction of these 6,000, so that's not 6,000 trips because it's a round trip, so 12,000. Maybe you're not going to get 100% model split, but you're also going to get recreation trips. People don't just take the subway for work. So you're going to get, 10,000 trips easy out of this extension. And how much is this? It's 10,000 trips. Which is not actually that much for 4.7 kilometers, but it's elevated mostly. There do exist the jobs. Remember, it's 8,000. There's also 8,000 jobs. Bay Plaza. We can absolutely flip and see what happens. So confirm advanced selection, paired analysis, swap. So know that the 8,000 jobs mostly are not coming. I mean, so I don't want where workers work. I want where workers live. So they're not going to be very subway centric. So you can kind of see how it's all over the Bronx, some Harlem. So yeah, the six will help, but it's a second order effect, which is fine. Um, a bunch of second order effects combined get you something better. Um, And so if you're getting a decent ridership out of this, and again, 10,000 is marginal for this, but given that this is mostly elevated, that should still be viable-ish. And if you're getting 15, 20,000, suddenly this becomes pretty solid extension, all things considered. Um, and yeah, so this is something that probably should be on the city's plans if construction costs can be reduced. Um, and again, I mentioned that I'm gonna talk about Eastern Queens. Uh, so let's kind of do the same thing there. BX12 tramway replacement, yay. That and Main Street are probably the most important tramways to build in the city. Again, driver costs are not going to go down. Something that busy, we're talking like 40,000, 50,000 people a day, that should not be a bust. Do I know why the E was never extended over the Far Rockaway branch? What do you mean? Also, Paul, I don't know about the different. Oh, I know what you mean. The ones where the the one where they're thinking of not going all the way to Broadway, but only by diverting upward. Yeah, that's stupid. They should go to Broadway and go to Broadway in 125th. Yeah, the construction here is going to be annoying because of the terrain. So this is a valley. So construction is a little more annoying here, but this area is redeveloping fast. And in theory, if there's Penn Station access west for the Empire, on the Empire corridor, which is a mainline rail that goes here, there's going to be a station here. Because the terrain here allows it, and here it's more difficult. So this is actually how it should be built. Why the E was never extended over the Far Rockaway branch? What do you mean? I mean, the Far Rockaway branch is this, and the E is here. Like, why was the E never extended like this? Because this is a commuter rail line, and this is a subway line. I mean, yeah, there were plans to maybe give a commuter rail line to the subway from time to time. This actually happened. This was like an old commuter line that was given to the subway, but this was just, again, it was just a line. This also goes out of the city, so kind of awkward for a subway that was always intended to be just in city. So anyway, I'm not gonna go over the longer line. So Utica through city center, and then through Manhattan, should call it city center, Manhattan, or even Northern. Northern is a little bit. This is very much for TOD. You don't need it otherwise. This line, like, it's not, the market's not there. It's a capacity improvement. And remember, once we're talking about capacity, suddenly the Crayon and other improvements are in tangent. It's just that this is useful if you're planning on adding the housing units that New York should be adding, which is 100,000 every year. Right. I mean, on the eve of Corona, they were adding about 20,000. So, let me make the arrow work a little bit better. Okay. So these are extensions that I literally have never evaluated. So so this is a premiere of Alon checks whether the crayon that they drew, because everyone has been drawing that crayon on the Strap Hangers campaign for 15 years, whether that crayon is in any way useful. So this, bear in mind, also competes with commuter rail modernization, because these should be infill stops on the LIRR main line. And these infill stops should be charging subway fare within the city. So there's Queens Village, there's Hollis, which might be a crew-only stop, I don't remember. There's a semi-solid case for a stop in between them. There's a very solid case for a stop between for activating Hollis and adding a stop between that and Jamaica, maybe here, Merrick. So bear in mind that there is a little bit of a double dip there. So let's try to look at any rate at commuting. Okay, so the Grand Central Parkway is an obstacle, so past that, maybe it's buses here, but people might just ride on all the way on Union Turnpike. I'm going to be annoying and split the difference and make Union Turnpike here maybe the northern limit. So clear selection, draw polygon, and what? Not Linden. Linden is kind of the southern end of all of this. So Grand Central Parkway, as we said. I don't need Google Earth anymore. Maybe all the way up to the freeway here. So, is it the freeway? Yeah, it's not Springfield. This is the freeway. Again, this is not the best because this one includes LRR. Let's go all the way to the cemetery. And go up until the LRR track here. So this is going to be our study area. This is Linden, so cut across to the cemetery. And then to the LRR, you can kind of see the broken street network. And here we go up to Grand Central Parkway. So again, this is a study area that is not exclusively subway because LRR modernization also plays into it. And include a little bit of Union Turnpike where I think people might actually ride a north-south bus. So confirm selection. I'm actually curious how many people work here, but it should not be a lot of jobs. This is a residential area. And seriously, I need to, and this needs to be wrapped up in probably about 10 minutes. So, you can just type in questions. Okay, the Archer Avenue line curves south to meet with the LIR. Oh, that I did not realize. Huh. So anyway, notice that the jobs are concentrated in Jamaica because it's people work. But the actual study area is a residential area, and I actually don't know if it's going to be 40,000 or less. It should be more, but I don't actually know these things. Oh, yes. 120. Yeah, so lots and lots and lots of commuters live here. Now, here's the thing. This is the eastern part of the city. First of all, some of them are on the subway. This is on the subway. Second, let me try to do advanced selection just to see how many of them even work. First of all, in the city, but also on the subway. This is low density for New York. Car ownership in this area is high. Let's not do Staten Island. This is so how many people work home first selection, work advanced selection? Actually, most of them, but I don't know how subway served they are because again, this is an area with high car ownership. So again, 90,000, but let's look at where the workers actually work. So if it's Manhattan or downtown Brooklyn, this is great. Airport, not so great. It's serviceable. If instead of doing all of this, I just wait, I want to do something different. Advanced selection, and I just want to see Manhattan. So how many of the ATA to work in the city, excluding Staten Island, are in Manhattan? Because that actually, because these people are probably already on the subway. They're just very uncomfortably on the subway, like bus to subway. Yeah, so this is 28. Basically, all of this is subway. The remaining 60K, I mean, it's a combo. And remember, this is not purely a market for the subway. It's also commuter modernization is going to be there. These people often, again, these people mostly own cars and drive them around here or here, or even here. But the subway could do this. Honestly, light rail could do this. The subway could do this. Could do this. Oh, the LRR could do this. So you should expect more ridership. So again, this is 56. 28 times 2 is 56 right off the bat. The other places, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to tell because downtown Brooklyn miscounts a lot of workers, a lot of public sector workers that are elsewhere. But it's something that very easily could be 100K. Now 100K, bear in mind, between these two, so it's not just these two extensions because it's also LIRR. 100K for 11 kilometers of subway, so something like, I don't know, this for our $2 billion. That's very nice. But again, it's not actually 100K because you should assume that the LRR is modernized first. So it's something it's viable, but again, I don't want to promise just because it's in competition with other things, and building all of them combined might not be. I mean, it's definitely viable, but it might not be economic if that makes sense. Um, so again, so the Crayon was actually not that terrible. I don't think. I mean, I've just done city side stuff, not Jersey side stuff. Art to Staten Island is also, Art to Staten Island just really depends, I think, on too many things. One to Red Hook. I think a bunch of developers like it because they want to redevelop this area, plus get to IKEA faster. But I mean, fuck this shit. People in Red Hook have transport needs too. Like there should be a bus here already. The only reason there isn't is, I think one, maybe two honchos personally decided they don't like it, and so even though the community wanted it and all the bus planners wanted it, it got removed from the bus redesign. So there's actually demand here. Is there a demand for kilometer of tunnel, including a lot of underwater? Maybe, but I mean, there's definitely demand for something. Now, as I said, I do need to go, and yeah, that's the W extension. Again, I think it should be a one extension, just because the W can become the R, and the one is dangling. And the question is, so I'm just going to ask if there are people, if there are questions. And again, I don't have a lot of time to answer. Yeah, they're trying to avoid tunneling underwater with a W, by which I mean, they're still going to tunnel. It's just going to be a weird tunnel that goes from this tunnel all the way here. It's kind of weird. Like, I get why they're doing it, but, and there is such a thing as an underwater tunnel premium, but I think the correct thing to do is to extend the one. Again, I'm glad they're looking at a bunch of different options. They shouldn't be dogmatic about this. My suspicion is that the one extension is the most viable. But again, I want to make it very clear. I'm glad that they're looking at multiple options. Like the idea is to, I mean, this is not geographically accurate, but the idea is to extend this or something like that. So I'm sorry about the very abrupt end, but are there questions? It's supposed to be not just New York, but I mean, New York is where the most glaring stuff there is, just because the construction costs are so high. For the record, it's actually light outside, but I mean, yeah, this is what I mean. You can kind of see that the lighting level outside is that is such that it does matter what I'm watching on my screen, which it did not at 7. It's one of the reasons I'm adding this abruptly. Not me. Let me not do the matryoshka. So, I'm gonna do one last round if there are questions. And if there aren't, then thank you for watching a very impromptu stream. And I will see you again with another video in a week. So ciao ciao. Oh, you missed. Is this going to be uploaded to YouTube? Everything is uploaded to YouTube. Unless the recording cuts out and then you see that this is not recording. So yes, this is going to be on YouTube. So ciao ciao.